Hello and welcome to the Good Food Institute's webinar on fermentation for meat, seafood, eggs, dairy, and ingredients. My name is Daniel Gertner, and I'm the lead economic and industry analyst here at GFI. Today, my colleagues and I will cover the evolving fermentation-enabled protein industry. We'll give an overview of the commercial landscape, investments, consumer insights, scientific progress, regulatory and public investment updates, and industry outlook as of 2024. For those of you not yet familiar with the Good Food Institute, we are a nonprofit think tank working to build a sustainable, secure, and just food system by advancing alternative proteins. To do this, we work across the areas of corporate engagement, science and technology, and policy. We are funded entirely by philanthropy, so if you find the insights and resources we provide useful, please consider donating. At GFI, we focus on feeding a growing population sustainably, efficiently, and safely. Demand for meat contributes to pressing global challenges like climate change, antibiotic resistance, pandemic risk, loss of biodiversity, and hunger and malnutrition. Alternative proteins offer a globally scalable solution that can address these challenges while helping satisfy the growing global demand for meat. We map out the most neglected areas that will allow alternative proteins to compete on taste, price, and nutrition. And we meet these challenges by funding open access research, developing resources, and educating and connecting the next generation of scientists and entrepreneurs working on food system sustainability. This webinar is an overview of GFI's annual State of the Industry report on fermentation. We also published State of the Industry reports for the plant-based and cultivated sectors, along with a report on the state of global policy. Webinars are available for each of those reports. This year, we also released a State of Alternative Proteins report, which shares stories about the people and places advancing plant-based, cultivated, and fermentation-enabled proteins. All these reports can be downloaded for free by going to this link. I'd like to thank the many GFI team members who contributed to this project, as well as external partners who supported with data and fact-checking. If you'd like to help us make our reports, webinars, and other open access resources as accurate as possible, please tell us about your company by joining GFI's company database, which is accessible on our website, and respond to surveys when we send them out. Signing up for our monthly industry newsletter is the best way to stay updated on our research, which you can also do through our website. Today's presentation is focused on fermentation-enabled protein. GFI defines fermentation as the use of single-cell fungi and other microbes as production platforms to produce proteins, fats, or other functional ingredients. There are three main types of fermentation used in the alternative protein industry today. Traditional fermentation has been used for thousands of years to produce familiar products such as bread and beer. It uses intact, live microorganisms to modulate and process plant-derived ingredients. This results in products with unique flavors, nutritional profiles, and textures. Traditional fermentation can improve the sensory, functional, and nutritional attributes of many alternative protein ingredients and products. Biomass fermentation leverages the high protein content and fast growth of microorganisms to efficiently produce large quantities of protein. Biomass fermentation offers the greatest opportunity to produce protein at scale because many microorganisms grow quickly, often doubling their weight in just a few hours. The microbial biomass itself can serve as an ingredient with the cells intact or minimally processed. Microbial biomass can be the main ingredient of a food product or serve as one of several ingredients in a blend. Precision fermentation is a form of specialized brewing that uses microbes as cell factories for producing specific functional ingredients. Precision fermentation is well positioned to create high-value ingredients that improve the sensory characteristics and functional attributes of plant-based products or cultivated meat. It can be used to make products like egg proteins, dairy proteins, animal-free meat proteins, including heme, and fats. We're increasingly seeing fermentation play a role across the alternative protein product spectrum, from ingredients to end products. In 2024, the fermentation-enabled protein industry saw significant innovation amid both successes and struggles. New pilot facilities and innovation hubs launched around the world, and technical advances in bioreactor design and shelf stability boosted production efficiency and product quality. And sustainability breakthroughs, including innovative gas fermentation and promising LCAs, signaled potential for positive climate impact. These developments position fermentation as a rapidly advancing platform for sustainable food system transformation. In the US alone, public investment totaled $125 million, including a $51 million grant for IFAB, the nation's first fermentation innovation hub. We also saw public investment and regulatory progress in Canada, New Zealand, and the EU, signaling a growing recognition of the value offered by fermentation-enabled foods. At the same time, we saw more products hit grocery store shelves, from whole-cut steak to fermentation-derived eggs, plus consumer favorites like ice cream, milk, and yogurt. And at least 21 partnerships were formed with robust activity in dairy product development and commercialization, seafood product development, and process optimization. Still, if we want to satisfy the growing demand for meat, more progress is needed and at a quicker pace. The fermentation sector needs more resources, investment, and innovation to help sustainably scale up, bring down costs, and create delicious food people crave. With that, let's dive into the commercial landscape for fermentation-enabled foods. Biomass, precision, and traditional fermentation utilize distinct production methods, occupy unique spaces within the food industry, and exist in different stages of development. Each fermentation approach offers a powerful way to diversify the food supply, enhancing its resilience to challenges like supply chain disruptions, such as bird flu outbreaks or extreme weather events. In 2024, the sector made strides across platforms and stages of development. Dairy manufacturers deepened their engagements, forming high-profile partnerships with fermentation companies. Diversified food and ingredient companies remained actively involved in the sector. New products launched, including whole-cut steaks and egg proteins, and several existing products expanded their distribution. And while many sectors faced capital constraints, investments in fermentation companies showed resilience in an otherwise subdued funding environment. Together, these developments reflect a sector that's diversifying and expanding, technologically, commercially, and geographically. We'll cover some of the year's key developments in this section. In 2024, GFI's company database identified 165 companies focused primarily on fermentation for alternative proteins, and an additional 210 companies involved in the sector through investments, partnerships, or business lines. While most fermentation companies still focus on end product formulation and manufacturing, there's growing activity upstream in areas like ingredient optimization and bioprocess design. These B2B efforts offer drop-in solutions that can enhance product sustainability and functionality, and the growing B2B ecosystem represents a lasting shift toward broader value chain integration. In 2024, we also saw strides in building out fermentation infrastructure. At least 16 new facilities were announced or opened last year, mostly in biomass and precision fermentation, with builds ranging from pilot to industrial scale. We also saw the rise of innovation hubs. At least 5 facilities, 4 in Europe and 1 in Singapore, were dedicated research and development centers. These hubs help companies de-risk scale-up, validate commercial viability, and reduce costs. And finally, there were significant additions in industrial scale capacity. The Middle East added 2 large-scale precision fermentation plants, including a $500 million biotech hub and a facility with 100,000 liters of fermentation capacity. Meanwhile, new and upcoming commercial-scale biomass fermentation facilities from companies like Enifer, Kinda, MASH, Nosh Bio, Solar Foods, and Planted are poised to produce tens of thousands of tons of protein annually in Europe. Together, these developments lay the groundwork for additional commercial-scale, cost-effective production. Many of the world's largest meat, consumer packaged goods, and ingredient companies remain active in the fermentation industry. These companies are engaging in a variety of ways, from investments in joint ventures to co-development, licensing, and pilot production partnerships. In 2024, we saw several notable collaborations, particularly in dairy, seafood, and functional ingredients. These partnerships are often structured to combine the technical expertise and agility of startups with the market reach, infrastructure, and regulatory know-how of established firms. By leveraging their funding, infrastructure, and distribution networks, diversified companies can serve as a force multiplier for the fermentation sector. Fermentation-enabled alternative proteins provide companies with additional sources of key inputs and encourage cost competition. Integrating these products into supply chains increases companies' resilience to market shocks, broadens risk management opportunities, and promotes long-term input cost stability. In 2024, commercial traction accelerated across the fermentation sector through both strategic partnerships and product launches. At least 21 partnerships were formed in the fermentation sector in 2024, with especially robust activity in dairy product development and commercialization, seafood product development, and process optimization. These collaborations paired fermentation startups with larger food and equipment companies to advance cost reduction, scale up, and formulation capabilities. In terms of new products, we saw launches spanning meat and seafood, yogurt, milk, creamer, and protein powders made with biomass fermentation. Milk and yogurt products made with precision fermentation-enabled dairy proteins, and whole-cut plant-based meats made with traditional fermentation. Together, these developments represent significant commercial traction and serve as proof points that fermentation-enabled ingredients and end products continue to move toward wider availability. Moving to investments. Since the first disclosed investment in a fermentation company in 2013, companies in the sector have raised $4.8 billion. In 2024, the fermentation sector attracted $651 million in total funding, according to GFI's analysis of data from Net Zero Insights. The funding landscape for alternative proteins has shifted to a more subdued environment in recent years. Elevated interest rates, uncertain scale-up timelines, and high production and materials costs have slowed the flow of capital into the alternative protein sector. Fewer companies are now raising money, and the rounds they do raise are generally smaller than they were during the low interest rate period of 2020 to 2022. The slowdown mirrors a broader decline in climate tech investments, which have also dipped each year since 2021. While total venture funding saw slight growth in 2024, that growth was almost entirely driven by investments in AI, meaning growth in AI funding was likely at the expense of other sectors. Despite these headwinds, investments in fermentation companies demonstrated relative resilience in 2024. Fermentation funding totals increased year over year, with investors drawn to fermentation-enabled products' functionality, high consumer favorability, compelling B2B propositions, and increased government support. Still, fermentation companies need access to more resources to expand product variety, increase scale, and implement process improvements. While 2024 was marked by a tighter capital market, bright spots still emerged. 4 deals surpassed $50 million. This tells us a few things. First, investment appetite still exists for strong, differentiated players. Second, investments going forward will likely be distributed to fewer companies and in smaller quantities than during the 2020 to 2022 low interest rate period. But fermentation startups seem well positioned to capture a sizable share of food tech funding in the years ahead. And finally, until we see successful exits that unlock broader private capital flows, fermentation investments will likely remain closer to the levels seen in recent years. Despite the relatively resilient funding totals for fermentation companies, adapting to the new investment environment will take time. That means some manufacturers may be unable to secure funding and may downsize, close operations, or merge with other organizations. But consolidation shouldn't be equated with decline. Consolidation is inevitable for any nascent sector, and it can actually accelerate progress by concentrating talent, IP, and know-how. So we'll continue to watch how these trends develop over the next year or so. So let's talk about where we go from here. Venture capital isn't typically well suited to fund new facilities. So as a result, companies looking to scale, especially via first-of-a-kind facilities, will likely need to identify alternative sources of funding. These include, but aren't limited to, equipment leasing and project finance, strategic corporate partnerships, and public sector programs and government investment. However, many of these channels remain underdeveloped for fermentation and other alternative proteins. As a result, it's more important than ever that companies, investors, governments, and philanthropists develop innovative funding solutions that support the growth of the fermentation industry. GFI also continues to conduct research, policy advocacy, investor engagement, and coalition building to create the infrastructure and incentives needed to unlock these new capital pathways and support the sector's long-term growth. Now I'll hand it over to Taylor, our consumer research lead.
Thanks, Daniel.
I'm Taylor, GFI's US Consumer Research Lead. Products made from fermentation are one of the longest standing segments in alternative proteins. Biomass fermented products like corn have been available in North America and Europe for decades. At the same time, concepts like mycoprotein and precision fermentation are still new to most consumers. In 2024, research from the US, Europe, and China shed new light on levels of consumer awareness for fermentation-enabled proteins and the ways that the industry can effectively introduce these concepts and products to the public. First, let's talk about high-level consumer metrics in the US. In a 2024 poll by Morning Consult on behalf of GFI, 13% of US consumers recalled having seen, read, or heard about precision fermented dairy. 12% of meat made from mycoprotein, and not shown here, but 27% had heard of meat made from mushrooms or fungi, which was another way that we describe mycoprotein. In total, 16% claimed to have tried made from mycoprotein after the term was defined for them. These metrics don't suggest an increase in levels that we saw in 2023, where we also measured them. So while awareness of mycoprotein as a concept is low, many products made from it are available in the US and have performed well here, while marketing on a variety of terms like mycoprotein, mycelium, just plant-based, etc. So while consumer education would likely help build awareness for mycoprotein as a concept and its potential benefits, this also suggests that there are multiple ways of explaining the category that can be successful. For precision fermentation, while this research reflects low levels of consumer familiarity, other research suggests that many consumers will be open to these products. GFI and Accenture's recent research on precision fermentation in Europe and the US, for example, found that more than 50% of consumers on average across these regions would be willing to try precision fermented dairy and eggs after learning about these products. So let's talk through that. Precision fermented proteins are not widely commercially available as end products today, and they present distinct marketing opportunities and challenges, making it important for companies offering these products to articulate to consumers both what they are and what benefits they offer in order to build awareness and demand. In 2023 and 2024, GFI and Accenture conducted consumer research on consumers in five North American and European countries: France, Germany, Spain, the UK, and US, to understand how consumers respond to different names for the category and different articulations of its benefits. Some notable findings from that include that how appealing consumers find the concept of precision fermentation and products made for it varies widely across countries. Consumers in most countries preferred animal-free as the descriptor for precision fermented proteins, but their degree of preference and what alternatives they preferred varied widely across countries. Consumers tended to prefer medium-length descriptions of how precision fermented products are made over longer ones, which poses challenges for consumer education. And finally, consumers' top expected motivations for trying precision fermented products were diverse across countries. For example, French consumers were most motivated by novelty, German and UK consumers by animal welfare, and Spanish and US consumers by health. So different types of precision fermented and fermentation enabled products can claim unique benefits in the context of the alternative protein market. For example, lots of mycoprotein products today offer clean labels and short ingredient list, while precision fermented products can be made with the same proteins, fats, sugars, etc., as found in comparable animal products. Many consumers associate fermented foods with digestive and gut health as well, which were increasingly important to consumers in 2024, according to the International Food Information Council's annual survey, which we summarize in the full report. But when we ask US consumers about their perceptions of these two fermentation-enabled protein types, we find they're mostly undifferentiated today, and people associate similar benefits with them as they do with plant-based products. So they expect them to be good for the environment, low in nutrients that many people try to avoid, like cholesterol and saturated fat. They expect them to be safe to eat and healthy. But fewer rate them as natural, rate the ingredients as familiar, or expect them to be tasty, unsurprising since so few people have tried them today. So overall, this points to challenges and opportunities for companies bringing different types of fermentation-enabled proteins to market in order to articulate the different benefits they can offer to consumers. Finally, in 2024, GFI Consultancy, GFI's independent strategic partner in China, conducted the first study on consumer perceptions of biomass fermented proteins in China. They found that even though plant-based meat analogs have struggled to gain traction in that market, and that despite how traditional plant-based proteins like tofu are staples in many people's everyday diets, consumers expect fermented proteins to have many benefits compared to their animal counterparts. And they suggest communication guidelines for the industry based on their findings. That research is linked here and summarized in the full report. So with that, I'll hand it over to Adam Lehman, one of the fermentation scientists on our team, to discuss the state of science and technology.
Thank you, Taylor. Hello, I'm Dr. Adam Lehman, GFI's Principal Scientist in Fermentation. I'm here to tell you today about the exciting progress and updates in fermentation-derived proteins from 2024. We'll start with protein functionality. Fermentation-derived proteins and ingredients are demonstrating appealing functionality and performance for alternative protein products. We'll begin with precision fermentation-derived proteins and ingredients. Fermentation-derived oils had made a splash in 2024, with higher emulsification and melting points reported from Zero Acre Farms and C16. See page 36 for more fermentation-derived fats and oils that can be used in alternative protein products. Next, in dairy whey proteins, fusion monopeptide whey and casein from a single expression system has been reported by Imagine Dairy. Highly soluble clear beta-lactoglobulin for nutrition applications have been reported and commercialized by Vivici, while higher performance lactoferrin with superior iron binding capability has been shown and commercialized by Turtle Tree. See page 32 for more whey protein updates. In precision fermentation-derived egg proteins, Augmented Reality is exploring expressing other bird species egg proteins for superior functionality and application-specific roles, like excellent foaming, binding, and emulsification. The Every Company has reported a highly soluble egg protein for new applications as far-ranging as bakery, drinks, and soups. See page 34 for more on precision fermentation-derived egg proteins. Caseins form complex interactions with fats and calcium salts to generate curds during cheesemaking. This makes them a food formulation challenge as precision fermentation begins to provide protein to improve alternative dairy cheeses. Algae Foods, Hent University, and DairyX are all reporting progress in understanding how this complex assembly process between protein, fats, and salts comes together. Elsewhere, New Culture is reporting highly functional casein protein from precision fermentation that can reduce inclusion percentage and drive down cost and use to produce cheese products like mozzarella. See page 33 for more updates on casein proteins. Regulatory filings from Impossible Foods and Geltor show increasing inclusion rates for precision fermentation proteins in meat products, suggesting additional functionality can be contributed by higher levels of precision fermentation-derived proteins in these alternative meat products. See page 35 for more precision fermentation meat protein updates. In biomass proteins, we're seeing progress from single-cell proteins and biomass from yeast, algal, and bacterial systems. Algal flours can be multifunctional ingredients in many products. Algama was granted several patents for meat alternatives, milk substitutes, and egg substitute formulations, as well as water-soluble ingredient extraction. See page 30 for more microalgae updates. Beijing Technology and Business University and Ocean University of China researchers identified peptides, which are short chains of amino acids smaller than proteins, that come from yeast that contribute umami flavor and could be used as an ingredient in biomass products to enhance their flavor. The Better Meat Co. and Nosh Bio both unveiled shelf-stable single-cell protein ingredients, opening the door for blended products and further ingredient distribution from these products. See page 27 for more updates. We also understand that fermentation-derived proteins can have positive contributions to both the climate and personal nutrition. Fairly Foods, formerly Bon Vivant, has released a life cycle assessment showing the contributions of different parts of their process to the overall carbon footprint of their product to highlight precision fermentation dairy protein approaches that both benefit the environment and highlight areas for future improvement. On the nutrition side, an example of a nutrition report, a 2024 publication in Clinical Nutrition, highlights how an interventional diet with microprotein as its central protein source can help reduce cholesterol levels in a population with high cholesterol. To provide the food ecosystem with abundant fermentation-derived proteins, the ecosystem requires what we'll call the 3 I's for growth: infrastructure, intellectual property protection, and innovation. Up first are updates on infrastructure. In 2024, BBEU commissioned their 75 cubic meter demonstration scale facility in Ghent, Belgium, and demonstrated production of Vivici's Vivitine protein as their first production run. Danone, in collaboration with Michelin and DMC Biotechnologies, is developing a precision fermentation facility with a 10-meter cube fermentation capacity in France. The Bezos Earth Fund has established 3 centers of excellence at universities around the world, including NC State University in the US, the National University of Singapore, and Imperial College London in the UK, with diverse AP research and development goals, but a strong focus on fermentation. GFI Brazil has published an ecosystem map and publication identifying 13 domestic facilities with pilot-scale fermentation capabilities in Brazil. See page 38 of the report for more on infrastructure. Monitoring intellectual property protection allows us to observe the commercially promising technologies being prepared for the ecosystem. IP protection volume, but also location, sheds light on the commercialization targets and R&D hubs of the fermentation-derived AP ecosystem. Globally, the US remains the leading filing jurisdiction among these applicants, with more than 400 applications since 2020, followed by Europe, Australia, Canada, Israel, South Korea, and China. Finally, processing innovation drives manufacturing efficiency and industry growth. We'll start with precision fermentation. Precision fermentation process improvements continue to focus on improving the techno-economics of production, which will enable efficiency and scale. GFI funded 3 projects in 2024 aimed at improving downstream processing, that is, protein isolation and purification in fermentation, to reduce cost and resource usage. Impossible Foods was awarded a patent for novel methods of extracting and purifying heme-binding proteins, those proteins responsible for the iron content of their plant-based meat formulations. For egg proteins, both the Every Company and Onego Bio reported increased titers for ovalbumin and ovomucoid, respectively. Higher titers are critical for increasing production output and driving efficiency. To enhance beta-lactoglobulin production in their precision fermentation microbes, Perfect Day has engineered those microbes to reduce the activity of endogenous enzymes like esterases that can hinder protein isolation and eventual formulation of the protein ingredient into alternative dairy formulations, therefore paving the way for easier formulations. And finally, in biomass fermentation, we're seeing progress from upcycling to valorizing to streamlining process. 2024 was a year of driving down input and production costs to deliver fermentation-derived biomass and single-cell proteins. Superbrewed Foods' postbiotic bacteria production using an anaerobic growth process received patent protection, while their biomass ingredient received a regulatory green light from the US FDA. Revive's process was shown to upcycle spent brewer's yeast to produce a texture-enhancing product for plant-based meats extracted from that yeast from fermentations. And elsewhere, university researchers and companies have announced processes and fermentation products from feedstocks as diverse as syngas, carbon monoxide, food scraps, and cocoa production side streams. Please see pages 31 and 36 for more. Now you'll hear from Michael, our policy specialist. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Adam. I'm Michael Carter, Policy Specialist in Diplomacy here at GFI. Overall, 2024 saw a large increase in public investment for fermentation research and commercialization, with public investment in fermentation matching that for plant-based products for the first time. Driven by large increases in funding from the United States and a steady high level of investment from countries in Europe, this increase reflects new attention from policymakers in the wake of heightening international competition for biotechnology leadership. About equally split between research funding and support for commercialization and facility construction, public investment in fermentation recognized the suite of technologies as essential to national priorities, including food security, resource management, battlefield readiness, and consumer well-being. The United States led the world in public investment in fermentation in 2024, leveraging the country's strength in national defense and agricultural production and processing to begin building domestic strength in biomanufacturing. The IFAB Tech Hub in Illinois, which received $51 million in federal funding and more in state and private funding, will unite agricultural scientists and researchers, the private sector, crop producers and processors, and leaders in fermentation to develop a full supply chain for precision fermentation in the breadbasket of the United States. At the same time, the Department of Defense worked with companies in precision, biomass, and gas fermentation to develop production systems that can be used in operations and prevent supply chain disruptions. Across the Atlantic, policymakers in Europe also continue to invest in the future of fermentation, with ongoing programs from the EU supporting research in precision fermentation and providing loans to companies in the fermentation space. A €20 million loan from the European Investment Bank to a biomass fermentation company, for example, will support the construction of a commercial scale facility, while grants from the EIC Work program did the same across Europe. In the United Kingdom, which is positioning itself as a leader in cellular agriculture, a new microbial food hub will unite researchers across multiple fields to advance the science of fermentation and develop new foods. In 2024, both India and China announced billion-dollar plans to develop their national bioeconomies, with alternative proteins mentioned as key technologies in both plans. While the amount of support for fermentation and other alternative proteins in these plans is yet to be seen, both governments' commitments to biotechnology leadership bodes well. In Singapore and Australia, governments likewise supported fermentation. A new research call in Singapore aims to improve the taste and price of fermented and plant-based products, addressing consumer demand directly, while policymakers in Australia provided financial support for a large new precision fermentation facility. Overall, heightened public investment for fermentation in 2024 indicates policymaker interest and confidence in the field, which promises to serve as an essential pillar of the developing biotechnology sector. Nevertheless, far more public investment is needed to achieve the price parity and production capacity necessary to address global challenges. Fermentation in all its forms can help policymakers achieve goals in securing their nation's food supplies, increasing scientific and technological leadership, managing scarce resources efficiently, and providing citizens with healthy, functional foods. I'll now pass the mic to Mackenzie, our regulatory attorney.
Thanks, Michael. Most governments have well-established regulatory systems that allow the use of microbial fermentation in food systems. In 2024, companies and governments worked together to bring innovative fermentation-derived products to market. In May 2024, New Zealand precision fermentation company Daisy Lab received approval from the New Zealand Environmental Protection Authority, or EPA, to expand its dairy protein production to 5,000 liters. The approval, granted under the New Zealand EPA's rapid assessment pathway, required facility inspections and proof of strict safety standards. This green light will enable the construction of a pilot facility and represents a key milestone in scaling fermentation-based dairy in the world's top dairy exporter. In Canada, in January 2024, Canada approved its first fermentation-derived animal-free milk protein when Health Canada issued a letter of no objection for Remilk, confirming no food safety concerns with their product. Health Canada's approval followed a comprehensive assessment under its guidelines for the safety assessment of novel foods. The letter recommended labeling the protein's source material and highlighting allergen risks for those with dairy allergies. Labeling will be enforced by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency under existing food regulations. Remilk plans to sell its protein to food manufacturers for use in products like nutrition bars, beverages, cheese, ice cream, yogurt, and plant-based drinks, and the product may face additional regulatory review at that time. In the European Union, the European Food Safety Authority accepted an application from the first Nordic company, Ennifer, a Finnish biotech startup, to seek regulatory approval for a mycoprotein ingredient in late 2024. The ingredient will go through the EU's novel food regulations, which require a detailed safety review for any food not commonly eaten for May 1997. This process is known for being thorough, and it can take several years. But once approved, the mycoprotein can be used in alt protein and dairy products, offering a sustainable food option that supports the EU's push for a greener food system. In 2024, the Indian government made steady progress in advancing regulations and policies to support all types of alternative proteins, including those made through fermentation. Starting in April 2024, India's Department of Biotechnology and the Biotechnology Industry Research Assistance Council hosted a first-of-its-kind closed-door regulatory conclave on alternative protein. This landmark event brought together key players from government, academia, industry, and international bodies. The discussions highlighted both the challenges and the potential for India to become a global leader in alternative proteins, including fermentation-derived products, with the right regulatory support. In July, Nature's Find received approval for its biomass fermentation-derived Phi protein, marking a key milestone for novel foods in India. And then in August, the Indian cabinet approved the BioE3 policy, which is a national framework intended to boost biomanufacturing in 6 priority sectors, including alternative proteins. The policy encourages innovation across academia, startups, and industry, while promoting globally aligned regulatory reforms, positioning India for significant growth in fermentation-derived proteins in the future. In the United States, companies selling novel fermentation-derived foods have 2 main regulatory options. One is to seek a food additive petition, which can take a while and involves formal FDA approval. The other, more common path is to seek GRAS status, meaning a product is generally recognized as safe. GRAS status lets companies market products as soon as experts confirm safety, but it's best practice to wait for a no questions letter from the Food and Drug Administration to confirm the agency's agreement with that assessment. Most fermentation companies choose to take the GRAS route. And in 2024, several companies either received or pursued GRAS status. So Imagine Dairy from Israel, the Better Meat Co., and Oobly, which are both based in the US, received no questions letters from FDA for their animal-free proteins, affirming their GRAS status. And New Culture, based in the US, and Vivici declared their animal-free proteins GRAS and are now seeking FDA confirmation in the form of no questions letters. Even though the GRAS process is quicker than a food additive petition, it still requires manufacturers to commission a rigorous scientific safety review. By submitting evidence of this review to the Food and Drug Administration and receiving a no questions letter, companies can safely bring their products to market with the knowledge that FDA has reviewed their determination. And with that, I'll pass it back to Daniel to close us out.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Fermentation-enabled proteins are an increasingly important component of the global protein landscape. In 2024, we saw meaningful scientific progress, expanded product availability, and increased investment in infrastructure activity. Governments are also taking notice. From the US to the EU to the Middle East, public investment for fermentation is accelerating. Still, challenges persist. Consumer acceptance of each fermentation approach is not yet fully understood, and companies still need to uncover the most effective ways to communicate the benefits of their products to consumers. Plus, many companies still face what remains a difficult capital environment despite year-over-year investment growth. But even amid these constraints, fermentation continues to strengthen supply chains, broaden ingredient functionality, and enable more diverse and resilient protein options. So what does that mean for the year ahead? Additional product launches spanning production platforms, product types, and regions are expected in 2025. High-profile partnerships with diversified companies in 2024 increase the likelihood of expanded distribution, and ongoing supply and disease pressures in the global egg and US beef and dairy markets present additional partnership opportunities for companies looking to diversify and reduce risks within their supply chains. The increased scale resulting from expanded distribution, product launches, and large-scale partnerships could improve production efficiency and lower costs in the years ahead. But financing remains a constraint. Venture capital is unlikely to cover the industry's full scale-up needs. Companies will need to adopt creative, multi-pronged strategies, supplementing private capital with public and philanthropic support. As companies learn to navigate this new financing landscape, those unable to access funding will likely downsize, consolidate with other companies, or close. As with any sector charting new paths in uncertain environments, it will take time to identify the most viable financing approaches, so some industry consolidation is likely to occur this year. Despite potential consolidation, fermentation-enabled proteins remain a critical tool for building a more resilient and diversified food supply. These ingredients can help countries and companies weather disruptions, from bird flu outbreaks to climate-related crop failures, by offering scalable, flexible, and locally adaptable solutions. In 2024, some firms facing rising egg prices and limited availability began exploring fermentation-enabled alternatives. Going forward, there will be more opportunities for these types of strategic shifts toward alternative proteins that strengthen supply chain stability and reduce exposure to price volatility. Zooming out, fermentation is well positioned to become a core platform for protein production. It offers the unique flexibility to produce proteins, fats, enzymes, and more with lower resource requirements and smaller environmental footprints than conventional animal agriculture. Global meat demand is expected to rise by over 50% from 2012 levels by 2050, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Fermentation-enabled proteins can be part of the solution to meet that growing global demand for meat. But to get there, we need a major ramp up in investment, regulatory support, and infrastructure development. This is not an overnight solution. Fermentation-enabled foods matching the taste, price, and availability of conventional meat, dairy, and eggs is not inevitable. But with continued investment, innovation, and collaboration, fermentation has the potential to provide consumers with the products they love while increasing food security, promoting biodiversity, and protecting public and planetary health. So thank you for tuning in to our presentation on fermentation. We are optimistic about the future of fermentation as an agricultural innovation that addresses the root causes of many of the challenges our food supply faces today. As we close, I want to highlight 3 reasons for optimism. First, scientific progress is moving at a rapid rate. From improved bioreactor designs and more efficient downstream processing to shelf-stable mycoproteins and novel fermentation-enabled ingredients, innovation continues to create more functional products at lower costs. Second, we're seeing meaningful traction across infrastructure and partnerships. With at least 16 new facilities, 5 dedicated innovation hubs, and 21 new partnerships, many involving major diversified food companies, the sector is scaling in smarter, more collaborative ways. And third, fermentation is increasingly viewed as a strategic solution for food security and resilience. Governments are investing, regulators are engaging, and companies are incorporating fermentation to diversify their supply chains. The path ahead will require sustained innovation, investment, and policy alignment. But with the progress achieved so far, we have a strong foundation to build on and a compelling case for fermentation as a solution to meeting the growing demand for protein. As a reminder, there are 2 more webinars in this series focused on the plant-based and cultivated meat sectors, and 1 more focused on global policy. We invite you to watch each of those webinars and dive into our report series. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.